Thank you so much. All right, let's get into it. With all your experience in public speaking that I've experienced myself, we were in the same club and also in District 47. What is the process of preparing for a speech evaluation, speech judging, or just giving normal prepared speech for you?
Well, the process for competing is different from the process for judging, right? When you're judging, all you need to do is understand the ballot right in front of you. And there's different criteria that are very specifically outlined almost every single year in every speech contest. Now, the process for preparing for competition, that's completely different. You can't get away with reading the ballot the day before or the day of. You have to understand what is the purpose of this contest. And Toastmasters offers 4 speech contests: the international, which is the big one that everybody knows about. And then there are 3 others that go to the district level: TableTopics, evaluation, and humorous. Now, I believe Toastmasters allows you to pick any 3 of those contests. It used to be they did all 4, but each contest has a role in developing public speaking, promoting certain skills. And for me, I've competed in all 4 contests. The preparation starts not the day before or the week before, but months before. You're not going to go and make waves at a table topics contest if you're not giving table topics, if you're not practicing those skills every week, at least every week, if not more often. And for me, it's not that impressive if somebody wins a contest. It really isn't. Anybody can win a contest if they have a good day or if they get a little lucky with that speech, but rather the preparation of years and years of speeches in many different venues and clubs and contests, that takes a tremendous amount of work. And you might get lucky once, but you won't get lucky for years.
Wow. Wow, that's very clear. Well, that's why consistency comes with this, right? That's why we're also trying to learn from you, because you've been able to win at the district level 3 times, and you almost won the 4th time, the last time. So I was there, right in the middle of the conference. Right. One of the things that I also quickly want to talk about is preparation. You just said that the one that you need preparation is when you're actually going to be contesting. So let's pick the speech. If you're planning to be in a contest for speech delivery, how do you start preparing for that?
Well, I'm assuming you're talking about international speech, because that's
Yes.
the one that is the prepared contest. You start with an idea. Your idea could be an idea for a hook, which is the most important part of the speech. It's what grabs the audience's attention. Or sometimes your idea might be for a theme that you find interesting or relevant, but you haven't heard that much in other Toastmasters speeches. And then from that little gem of an idea, which might be a word or 3 words or a quotation, you start thinking about, well, how can I build around this idea to communicate it? And for me, it's not to communicate it to the judges, but rather to communicate it to my audience, because the judges are part of the audience, but the judges will respond to the audience. So if you're giving jokes and they're bombing, the judges aren't going to reward you for humor in any contest. But if you're giving jokes and the audience is connecting and laughing, now you have a huge advantage with the judges, because humans are social animals. When everybody's laughing, you're more likely to laugh. And that makes you appear successful to the judges. And more importantly, you make your point.
Wow, thank you. That's very powerful. Of course, the judges are going to look around and see what's going on here. What do I put down and things like that. That would lead me to my next question. I've watched a couple of your speeches, excellent speeches, those that I've had there in YouTube, those that are not in YouTube, I've seen a lot of them. How do you pick your experiences that you think the audience can relate to? What is the process of saying, well, I went out, I traveled, I experienced this. Is it a good idea to share? how do you pick which one?
It has to be a story that you've gone through that resonates. And I think what resonates is if people understand the meaning of that story. So I have one example that I've given in several different speeches. I first came to South Korea. I was working and I got there in the middle of the night. It was winter. I didn't speak the language and I'd never been to this country, nor did I know anyone in the country. And I end up getting lost. And through the process of getting lost in the dark, it gets cold. I'm frustrated. I start to fear that I'll never find where I'm supposed to go to sleep for the night. And I think that even though that's a very specific story in my life, it resonates because everybody has been frustrated by something where they might have felt stupid or they were in a group where they didn't totally fit in. And so my job is not to tell my story. I already know my story. My job is to help the audience connect to whatever it is I'm trying to illustrate. And in this case, the point is a very kind stranger helped me find my apartment building, even though it took an hour and it was at night and it was winter and very cold. And I'm showing the kindness of strangers, even towards people who really have no business in their country, right? I'm not Korean. I don't speak their language. I don't know anything about them. And yet, this guy went out of his way when he could have done any number of other things and helped me find shelter. And I think people respond very well to that kind of story because somebody's helped them out.
Wow, interesting. That's very important to emphasize. The last experience that I had that is very close to that is the last convention. One of the semifinals went to finals, and a speech at the finals. When I was hearing the speech at the finals, I'm like, it depends on who the judges had, the way they're going to embrace this type of speech. And I end up everything. I approached the finalist because he didn't place at that point, and I asked him, "Why did you pick this?" And he was like, "Yeah, it was just a spiritual reason why he picked that." And he also was aware of the risk that was involved. So that's something that we have to emphasize, that, well, it's just people relate to things that can connect with them. And if it doesn't connect with them very well, there's a very high risk of getting low points, unfortunately. Thank you for sharing that. One of the things that we also want us to talk about is Toastmasters. The way we wrap up speech. There's something that I've heard so many times in Toastmasters that I've seen that almost 80% of Toastmasters end their speech. When immediately they say this, I know they were going to stop their speech. Do you know what this statement is?
Thank you.
So the next time.
Oh.
When most of the time when people say that, so the next time you do this, I'm like, oh, then they're about to stop. And most of the time, I've not been wrong about it. So my question is, do you use that? And what recommendations will you give for people to, like, not stop abruptly, but still let the person listening to the speech that, well, I'm wrapping up, I might end very soon. And if I end very soon, I don't want you to have an accident in the drive that I'm taking you through.
I do not use that. I know what you're talking about, and I've definitely heard it, but I don't want to telegraph the end of my speech, right? I don't want to let people know I'm almost done, because then they're going to start thinking about what happens next, the next speaker, or I need to fill out this ballot, or we want to get to the parking lot before the other people. I would rather signal the end of my speech with whatever my impact statement is. I call it a clincher statement, but it's an impact statement. And if I say, so the next time, I'm really telling people, all right, we're done here. You got what you need to get. So I want to be cagey. I want to sneak up on the audience where they know it's the end when it's the end, but they don't know it's the end 10 seconds before the end, because I think that steals the thunder from that clincher statement. I mean, why do people use it? Because it's an easy way to end, right? It's the same reason people say, my next point is, you don't have to say your next point. You could just go. You could transition. But people are accustomed to that formula, and then it feeds on each other.
Yep, yep, yep. That's something that's very common. I just want to hear another Toastmaster's opinion about that. Well, on the other side of it is also the beginning of the speech. I was at the convention just concluded. One of the people that almost won at a couple of years ago. I don't want to say which specific year, and I think the person actually got disqualified based on timing. Very experienced speaker. That's what I'm trying to say. And the person also told me about their disapproval of being boring at the beginning of the speech. In which case, when you're giving a speech, you just say, fellow Toastmasters, um, the um, the chair for today, and you just normal, expected, boring way of just doing things like that. I think we all do it. And my question is, how have you been able to not do that? How have you been able to be a little bit creative so that you don't just say the same thing that almost everybody say at the beginning?
So I'm a little bit of a rebel in Toastmasters in that sometimes I won't even acknowledge the contest master, the Toastmaster of the day, or the dignitary. And the reason is I want to make sure that I have the greatest impact in whatever time that I have. And if I'm thanking every DTM, which is Distinguished Toastmaster if you're not in Toastmasters, and I'm thanking every official in that meeting and acknowledging the guests and acknowledging the person who introduced me, I feel like I wasted 20 seconds because you know what? I could thank that host or that MC or acknowledge those distinguished guests. I could acknowledge them after the meeting, after my speech, or before my speech. I don't think they came to see me acknowledge them, right?
Yep.
That would be a waste of their time. They came to hear something new and special. And so while I understand starting your speech by acknowledging the people who invited you to speak, I also think it's like saying I love you to your mother after she
Mhm.
gives you dinner, right? She
Yeah.
knows you love her. You don't need to say it every day. She's still going to feed you.
Wow. Wow. So the question is, how do you say I love you to your mom without actually saying it? Maybe you ask her, well, can I do some work for you? Can you? Then she's like, oh, this kid probably loves me, right? Because
Yeah, you show her, you give her a hug and a kiss, you treat her for a nice meal, you wake up early and bring her breakfast in bed. I think moms would be pretty happy with that.
good, good. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that. Another idea that I also need to talk about now that we're talking about speeches and how the way people perceive speeches. It's always a good thing when I hear speech and I find it very easy to follow. That means that I perceive the speech in a straight line.
Mhm.
I've seen that sometimes it's not always easy to do that. People branch off to say something, to say a quote, and things like that. And for me, it seems that if it's too much of branching off and I can't perceive this speech like a straight line, sometimes it's very difficult for me to follow. And for you, is there any advice you have around that? When you write a speech, how often do you try to make sure that it's in a straight line that is easy to follow?
I know exactly what you're talking about. Usually, there are 5 bumps in the speech: introduction, 3 different points in the body, and then a conclusion. And you're going to know it's a bump because the speaker will telegraph, either with their body or with their words, that
Mhm.
they're moving from one thing to another. Now, there's nothing wrong with this method, it is an organized method. But I challenge the people listening to this podcast to think of a speech as a flexible document. So you don't have to have 5 bumps. You could have one bump. You could tell one story, and that story could be your introduction, your body, and your conclusion. You don't even have to distinguish it into 3 parts. If the story's effective, it'll do everything the standard speech construction will do, but without you risking, hey, why did they branch off to this part? Because you've centered the entire speech around one idea. And a few years ago, there was a very talented world champion of public speaking who did exactly this. All his speech was about was a trip he took to India for a wedding. That's it.
Mm.
It wasn't 3 stories. It wasn't 3 parts. It was one story. And it was a straight line that was beautifully woven together. Nobody got lost. That's why he won.
Wow. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. So, because you want to enjoy a speech and not feel stressed trying to figure out what this person is saying. Because they say, well, when you're talking to an audience, you want to make it so easy for them to understand what you're saying as much as possible. And I think a lot of people forgets that in this world whereby we just quickly want to impress people, and it's very easy to lose the audience trying to do that every time. Another concept that I also want us to talk about while giving a speech is the theme of the speech, the main message that you're trying to pass across in a speech. So when you write a speech, when you deliver a speech, at what point do you bring in the main message that you're trying to pass across? Because one of my mentors will say, John C. Maxwell will say that I never tell a story without making a point. I never make a point without telling a story. So you try to make a point, but the story is also very important. So how do you bring in a point during your own speech when you're thinking about it, when you're writing it?
I think you want to start with the point. Ideally, you don't want to insert the point at the end, right? The point is why you're delivering that speech. And the stories should be anything that illustrates whatever the point you're trying to make. And I think most practiced speakers understand this, right? They're not going to sit there and tell a story just for fun. We're not comedians. we are we are public speakers, and that's why we're up there. We're informing or we're persuading most of the time. And so you don't have to tell the audience the point of my speech is for you to understand that we're all one human race. You don't have to ever use those words, but you show them through whatever story you want to share that illustrates that point. And a lot of people will do 2 or 3 stories, and I think, wow, this is an imbalanced speech because one of them was so moving. Usually that one they use in the beginning, but then you start to see that they were fudging a little bit, just trying to push that third thing or that second thing so it fleshes out the rule of 3. Now, if you have 3 great stories and they all fit a common theme, go ahead and do it. But you don't have to do it that way, not in an international contest, nor do you have to do it in your club.
Wow. Wow. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That's really powerful. That's really powerful. Most of your speeches that I've listened to, I still remember the things that happened in the speech, the things that I like from the speech. And that goes to the fact that they were memorable. And are there any factors that you bring into the speech that makes you think, well, I think if I bring this in, people will remember this speech, even if they forget the point, just like we said, but then this aspect of the speech, they will remember it. Are there anything that you look out for to add to the speech to make it memorable?
Yes, you have to take risks to be memorable, because if your speech sounds like the 3 people who spoke before you, nothing will be memorable. You just gave the same introduction, 3 points, and conclusion in a similar way that many other speakers could have done. So when you're taking risks, you're never 100% sure that it's going to be successful. I'll give you an example. I was in an area TableTopics contest, and I happened to have an orange. I think it was my snack. And I never planned on using this orange during the
Yeah,
speech.
yeah.
But the moment came, and I was able to use the orange almost like LeBron James using a basketball. Now,
Wow.
I knew there was a high percentage chance that I was going to try to make a shot with
Mhm,
the orange into the trash can, and it
mhm.
wasn't going to make it because I'm not a
Yeah,
good basketball player.
yeah.
But I said, what if I do? What if I make this? And it just happened that in that contest during the speech, I made the shot. That
Ooh.
orange went straight into the can, and people went crazy. They were clapping, they were screaming. They thought I'd been practicing this. Truth was, it came to me at that moment. it was a huge risk. Now, if I'd missed, the speech wouldn't have been bad. But how many times have you been in an area contest and seen somebody who looks like me make a shot in basketball? I doubt you've ever seen that before.
Yeah.
It worked.
Wow, that's very powerful. And that makes me remember the last conference, as this District 47, somebody actually gave a speech by drawing.
Yes.
So people do things, right? So thank you. I see you know my next question. I was supposed to ask you about how you try to be in the moment, but you just gave me a good example of how that works for you. All right, thank you so much. But then, so one of the things that I've also seen people that are very engaging, just like you do, but I'm not sure that you've done this before. People use their name, their looks, and their appearance to connect with the audience because you're right in front. I think comedians do this the most. I think public speakers don't do it as much as possible. People use the way they look, their appearance, their name, something that is so obvious for the audience to really just know that they are here and I'm not just trying to regurgitate a speech to you. I'm really here in the moment and I want you to see me that I'm here with you. So for you, have you ever tried any of those? And have you ever thought of doing it and you didn't do it?
I have done that. So that technique is for me self-deprecating humor, right? You're making fun of yourself a little bit in order to get laughs, to humanize yourself to the audience, to break the ice. Now, I've had the privilege of speaking in different parts of the world. And Tolu, in the West, audiences really like self-deprecating humor. But
Yeah.
I can tell you in East Asia, the audience will pity a speaker who uses the same technique. You know, if you're fat and you make a fat joke, that might go really well in Canada and Europe and the United States. It might even go well in South America. In China, you know, they would start thinking, oh, this poor person, you know, they just want to be thin, and they distract themselves from what you're really trying to do. So there's a little cultural nuance to what you're able to do. But I mean, my name's Luis with a Z. I've been told my whole life, you're spelling your name wrong. It's with an S. No, I'm not spelling my name wrong. My name is spelled with a Z. But because where I live, there's a predominantly Hispanic population, and many of them spell Luis with an S, you know, they like to correct me for my own name, or they'll tell me I'm mispronouncing my name. It should be Louis, not Luis. And there's nothing like being told you're mispronouncing your own name. But yeah, you have fun with that. And I'm not the funniest speaker. I'm not somebody who's going to light up a stage that way, but I've done it and it works very well for, I think, Western audiences.
Wow, that's a very important point you made there. Audiences are very different, even as you move from one country to another country. And even within the United States, each state is very different. People act differently. I'm in Maryland and I was in Florida, so I can I can tell you that for sure. People are very different, even within the United States. Thank you so much for sharing that. One of the things that I also liked about your speech delivery is your choice of words that you use and the pauses that you have. It seems that they are very deliberate and very intentional when you give your speeches. When you practice your speech, do you intentionally just know that I'm going to pause here, I'm going to use this kind of words here, or do you read the room to do that? How do you make it flow without making mistakes?
You have to do both, Tolu. So the first thing is, why are you pausing? A lot of times in Toastmasters, we coach fellow Toastmasters to pause because they're speaking too fast. And the audience needs a chance to process what they're going to say, especially since nervous speakers tend to speak fast. But when you have a lot of experience, there's different reasons to pause. So you can pause, for example, to let the emotion pulsate. They understand what happened, but you want them to feel it longer. and that might be a half-second pause, which sounds short, but it's actually a long pause in conversation. Or it might be a full second pause, which is very long, or it might be a quarter-second pause. Average person wouldn't even know the difference between a quarter second and a half second because it's fast. But when you're in the moment and you're having this connection with the audience, there's different ways to do it. I'm not going to lie to you and say that I prepare and plan for every pause. I don't. A lot of that is experience. I know if I'm hitting the audience with something heavy, I can't just move on to the next thing. You know, they're not ready for me to move on. They need to feel what I said for a moment. And I have some skill with knowing when that moment happens and exactly how long to pause. Now, the other end of that would be comedic, right?
Mhm.
If I don't pause after a joke, I'm going to speak over the applause. That means my audience doesn't hear what I'm saying next. So I lost an opportunity to continue the thrust of my speech. So in that case, I'm just pausing because I did my job. The audience needs to laugh to acknowledge I did my job. And then when I'm ready, I can move on. So emotional, dramatic, comedic, or just to give them a chance to breathe. You
Yeah.
know,
Right.
they're all important. And when you have done it for 23 years, or
Mhm.
no, 27 years,
Yes. Mhm.
you start to learn, you know, when to pause.
Wow. So that the audience don't feel like you're hitting them on the head with something and
You don't
they're kind
want
of
that.
dizzy. They're kind of dizzy now because of too much information. Another part of speaking that I also think we should talk about is the fact that you give a presentation on inclusive language. And in that presentation, you talked about gender and stereotypic tagging and how it's a trap that people should avoid in speaking.
Mhm.
What experience do you want to share for us around that just emphasize the importance of that?
I mean, one of the experiences is just having a daughter, right?
Mhm,
So I know you have two
mhm.
daughters,
Yeah,
beautiful young girls. I have one, and the way I grew up was, oh, if you need help, ask a policeman
mhm,
or a fireman, you know, to help us. Or the president was always a masculine, right? He.
yeah,
Or Supreme Court justices were known as Mr. Justice. So what that does is it excludes all the girls from
yeah,
being able to envision themselves in these roles that were once exclusively male and are no longer. But the thing is, the language evolves less quickly than the culture. So now people are very comfortable saying firefighter, police officer, mail carrier rather than mail man. But those of us who are older and were trained a certain way, we still have that habit. Even though we know that many police officers are women, I still hear policemen, right?
mhm,
And I know what it means. And they have no intention of excluding. The language is excluding. And only now, after reflecting, you know, generationally, do we see, oh, yeah, maybe we shouldn't call them that. Maybe there's a better word to acknowledge the risk and sacrifice of female firefighters and female police officers and female soldiers, sailors, and Marines. We live in a different world. I was raised in the 20th century. Now we're in the 21st century. Not even the beginning anymore. We're in the getting to the middle of the 21st century.
yeah.
First quarter of it is already gone. And so I gave that speech that you referenced, that training to educate Toastmasters who don't realize that language can serve to exclude people.
Wow, interesting. That's very powerful because when you say police, people usually say policeman. No, people don't think about policewomen. Then the flip side of it is nursing, right? When you go to the hospital and you want a nurse to talk to you, people just expect a woman to come. And when once in a while you see a man, you freak out. Like some people freak out because they're like, oh, whoa, nurse, a man. Why?
It works both ways. Yes.
It works both ways. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Really appreciate it. One of the things that I've seen people do increasingly in public speaking is speaking and asking the audience to do something while they're speaking. And it seems that it depends on the audience, the way they respond to that. And is there any thoughts you have on that as to when you would use that? I'm not really sure you do that a lot in your speeches. Why do you stay away from that?
So what you're talking about is a call to action, where the point of a speech is to get people to vote for a certain political candidate, or maybe even to register to vote, or maybe to get a colonoscopy to check to see if they have risk for certain types of cancer. And there's nothing wrong with a call to action. It's a purpose to a speech. The counter to that is you also might be preachy, right? While people know that smoking is bad, just because you tell people not to smoke doesn't mean they'll do it. In fact, if you have a teenager, they might do the opposite because they don't want to do what you say. So I don't want to be preachy to an audience unless I'm absolutely sure that what I'm going to say will be relevant and impactful for every single one. Every single one. And if you're speaking to an audience that you don't really know, you're taking, for me, an unnecessary risk. Now, you could still have a call to action that's implicit, right? Where you make them reflect on something and then they decide for themselves. I just don't like being told that's why you should learn CPR. I mean, maybe I have something else that I want to do instead. And now you just challenged me to do this thing. And some people are rebels. They're going to say, no, I don't have to do that. Right? I don't want them to think that way. I'd rather them realize for themselves, oh, that's why I should study CPR.
Oh, wow. Interesting. That's a very unusual way to look at it. But let's look at during the speech. You actually want the audience to clap, to stand up, to do something. How do you feel as an audience? You're in a speech and the speaker is telling you to do all that?
I don't like it. So every speaker will poll the audience at some point. It's so popular in Toastmasters. How many of you have ever been lost? Okay, yeah. You know what you're going to get. Everybody's been lost. You know, GPS doesn't work. You're in a new city or a new country, right? I don't think it takes a lot of skill to poll the audience. What really, really makes me mad is when the speaker doesn't react to what the audience told them. So if you ask how many people have ever been lost and 95% of the audience raises their hand, and then you move on to your next point, you really just told the audience, I don't care what you say. I have a plan for this speech and I'm going to keep moving on. So for me, if you're going to interact with the audience, oh, close your eyes. Oh, raise your hand. Oh, turn to somebody next to you. Then you better acknowledge whatever happened in that moment. And too many speakers just skip over it. It's like they did it up. I interacted with the audience. Check. Now I'm going to go back to my speech. No, you ask them to do something. You better give them some benefit for having done that thing. And it's just not my style of public speaking. I've done it. I've polled the audience, but I think it's overdone.
Yeah. Wow, I agree with you. Right, that especially that piece of reacting to what it said. That's where the beauty is actually going to come from. You can just keep moving without reacting to what it said. Listening to most of your speeches, there's something that you do very well that I really like. When you're giving a speech, you use sentences, and all of a sudden you're now using words to describe. You don't have to use sentences anymore. You know what I'm saying? Like you're saying tall, LeBron James, like all this kind of things. So you're using words to just, it seems, and it flows very well. Instead of using sentences, you're now just using words to describe. And when do you decide to use that such that people still understand what you're saying? Then you can now go back to now using sentences.
This comes from my training as a teacher, right? One way to communicate with a class is to lecture to them, to talk to them, to ask them a question. And that's dominant. We are primarily communicating through our ears and our mouths, but there's also that visual component. And the visual component complements whatever you're saying verbally. So I know the speech you saw where I said tall like LeBron James. And we all know LeBron James is very tall. He plays for the NBA and he's a star and he can do so many different things so well. But if I tell you LeBron James is 6'8", that just that goes right past you. But if I do this, tall like LeBron James, now you get the sense that you're looking up at a giant, and you can play act that to really illustrate to your audience how you felt during that time. And I'm not an actor, but I can do a little bit. I can mime a little bit. I can use my arms and my body and crouch down and go on the floor. And these are ways to play with the audience's expectations and make your point. And I used to not be very good at that. I had to work on that because I'm a verbal person. I like wit that's based on words, not a physical sort of comedy. But there's a place for physical in public speaking. And some people do that really well. Ramona Smith, who you had on this podcast a few weeks ago, I was in Chicago when she won 2018. I went in person and she did that very well. She had boxing abilities and dancing and singing.
Singing.
That's a one person show, right? She did everything. That's not really my way. I prefer to make the point through words, but when you have an opportunity to do something different, if you have the skill set, you should do it. And Ramona said, I heard this, if you can't sing on key, don't sing, right? I can't sing on key. That's why you've never heard me sing in a speech. But if I could, I would totally.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. That's very powerful. One of the things that I've also done following your story is that you do the story slam. I just watched one of those series that you did, and I know that's something that is also common in Florida. Not sure whether there's something like that in Maryland yet. And that means that the aspect of public speaking that has to do with being able to tell a story very well is something that we don't talk about enough. So my question is, when did you get into that storytelling? It seems that it started before you became a Toastmaster, and how had that changed now?
It didn't start before I became a Toastmaster, but it started when I was still fairly new in Toastmasters, maybe my third year or something. I think that storytelling is an ancient art, right? Before any human wrote a single word, we were telling stories in our tribe, in our clan, amongst our kin, in small villages all over the world. Humans have been around for 250,000 years. That's the story of our human race. It goes back that far. Written language is only 5,000 years old. So most of our species, we communicated verbally and we told stories, right? And those stories are how we taught our children and our neighbors and our friends why you shouldn't eat this berry, right? You know, if you said don't eat this berry, that goes in one ear out the other. But if you tell a story in a creative way, people remember that. So I started storytelling, I think because I was invited. And the particular story slam that you watched, I did a bad job with that. Not because my stories weren't good, they were. It was because I was using too much of Toastmasters in that story slam. So I definitely had an introduction, several body points, and a conclusion. What I should have done was picked one story, stretched it out over the whole 5, 6, 7 minutes, and then I think I would have been more competitive in that contest. But at the time, I hadn't been to many story slams, so I didn't fully understand the difference between giving a speech in Toastmasters and telling a story in that format. Now I do know the difference. And actually, I got feedback at that contest. I came in third, and they said, you're a great speaker, but you came in third because you gave a speech, and this is a story slam. And that person was right. I did give a speech, and even though there were stories in the speech, that's not the way that story slams usually work. And the most famous one is Moth. So if you want to look up some great storytellers, you go on YouTube or find Moth on Google, and you'll see some truly impressive storytelling skills. And I appreciate it as an art. It's not something that I pursue to do, but I definitely enjoy being in the audience for that.
Wow, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that. Storytelling. I'm going to look into that. So looking into your speeches, the things that I've seen that you do very well is pauses, silence, scanning the room, and using gestures without words during the speeches. And you said that came from just being able to read the room and things like that. It seems that it changes from one speech to another speech. The timing, you said it has to be both you think about it before the speech and also during the speech. So that is really clear. But then I think people have different opinions as to how much gestures is needed during a speech. I've seen people say, well, maybe you shouldn't use that gesture because it seems that you're talking to your friends when you use that kind of gesture because it's very informal. I think that's that's the kind of language that was used, and it seems that as you move from one settings of organization to another one, the expectation for gestures changes. For example, in Toastmasters, like we really like gestures that's big. You've seen people won contests when it's almost like they're acting. They're not even giving a speech because their gestures was there and people enjoy that a lot. So based on your own experience, what advice would you give on gestures? Because it seems to be working for you a lot.
Well, the first thing that you have to learn is when not to use gestures. So what I teach my students is there's a neutral position in public speaking. And the neutral position is standing up straight, legs shoulder width apart, arms relaxed at your side. And I recommend putting your dominant foot, for me, it's my right, just about a half step above your weak foot, which is your left. And there's a reason for all these things. It keeps you balanced. It prevents you from swaying. It shows the audience that you're not nervous, that you're ready to go and have control over your space. That's not using any gesture. That's the neutral position. So many speakers don't know the neutral position. Or maybe they know it, but they don't do it. You don't see it in their speeches. So I'll always start out a speech in neutral, and then I get out of neutral. Now, you get out of neutral for a reason, right? You're moving on to a new point. Now you can walk the room to signal I am physically moving, but I'm also moving on in the speech. And audiences get that. Where it gets confusing is when you're moving all the time. Now the audience doesn't even know why you're moving. So it becomes a distractor. I think that learning how to be in neutral and how to speak in neutral will make all the gestures more powerful because you're using them intentionally and not to distract the audience. Some people are hyper. They move around because they have a lot of energy. Well, you have to control that energy and use it wisely.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. So now we're getting into speech evaluation, speech competition, and judging. At some point, I can excuse me. I can imagine that you've done each one of these. As Toastmasters, most of us has done that at some point. Which one of them do you enjoy the most? Speech delivery, evaluation, or judging?
I very much enjoy evaluation. And the reason I enjoy evaluation is because it is so analytical. You are hearing a speech that you probably have never heard before, figuring out what that speaker needs out of your coaching or evaluation, and then presenting in a way that makes sense both for the speaker and the audience with a very limited amount of time to prepare that. So for me, it's an intellectual challenge, right? Because you're trying to do a lot of things in a short period of time. And I find that sort of analysis very stimulating for me as a person, to develop my speaking skills, but more importantly, to help the person who spoke, right? I'm evaluating their speech. I'm not doing it for myself. I want them to realize something. I want them to realize what they're good at. And I also want them to realize what they need to work on. And I think that too many evaluators use the sandwich method: a good thing, a bad thing, and another good thing. I do not like the sandwich. I'm returning the sandwich. The reason I don't like it, I don't like it because not every speech is the same, and yet you're giving every speech evaluation the same format. Now, if the speech has 2/3 of things done well and 1/3 of things not done well, I guess it makes sense to structure it that way. But I think most speeches don't fit perfectly in that method. The idea of the sandwich method is you don't want to overwhelm the speaker with many criticisms, but sometimes you know that a speaker can handle it. I'll give you an example. My mentor in Toastmasters is Terry Spencer from Davie Toastmasters. He's a district champion in humorous speaking. If I pretend that Terry gave a great speech and that there's only one little thing he could have done better, he's going to be disappointed in me because he wants to improve his skills. And so that requires a level of honesty. Now, Terry has been in Toastmasters longer than me. So if I criticize him one time too many, he's not going to quit because of me. Would I do that to a brand new speaker who I didn't know, have 2 pieces of criticism and 1 compliment? No, I don't know that person. I don't want to take the risk. But I know Terry is a gifted speaker with a lot of skill. He can handle getting 2 pieces of criticism. In fact, I think he wants it because there's a reason after 16 years, he's still doing this activity. He still thinks he can get better. And it's my job to show him how to get better. So I don't think I ever used the sandwich method. I can't think of a single time in the last 10 years where I've used it.
Wow. Wow. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. You don't like the sandwich. Now I know you don't like sandwiches.
I don't like it.
So let's focus a little bit on judging now. I think it's a big task to have to look at the speech and rank the contestants first, second, third, right? Especially if you have like 10, at least 10 in most cases. In your own cases, what technique do you use to do the ranking when you have to like listen to the first speech all the way to the 10th speech without missing the information that you're supposed to think about?
So I definitely use the ballot, and I would be a judge who takes extensive notes, if not right on the ballot, then on a piece of paper next to the ballot. And the notes helps you stay engaged, but also helps you remember the things that stand out from that particular speech. Now, every contest has a criteria on the ballot, a way you're supposed to evaluate them. And I think that a lot of Toastmasters don't really understand the impact of that ballot. For example, in the contests that I've participated in, there's 10 points for summation. What is summation? Summation is ending the speech. Now, most Toastmasters end the speech the same way. They end with a tie back to something they said earlier in the speech, or they end with the quotation or question that they got as the prompt for their speech. There's an art to summation that is so difficult, and it doesn't get rewarded nearly enough. I mean, I don't have to think about a tie back. I can do it very easily because I've been public speaking for a long time. But the way you do it, the skill at which you do it, I don't think gets noticed by judges who don't have a deep level of experience. Now, I've had contests where I skipped the summation, and it's because I ran out of time, right? If I had another 20 seconds, I would have done it, and I would have done better on that 10 points. So there's time management, and there's understanding the ballot. If you don't do summation, you're giving up 10 points. and you're probably going to lose that contest unless you had a really, really big lead on all the other points. And that's strategy, Tolu. I mean, when you're a competitor, it's not just about who's the best speaker. If you get to a District 47 contest where I'm from, you're already good. Even if you're, the worst in the group, you're not bad to get that far. And if you get to the international level, semifinals, finals, you have skills. Everybody knows vocal variety. Everybody knows timing. But the artfulness at which you get through those different criteria in the ballot, that is so nuanced. And I think that judges who haven't been on the stage and had a deep level of experience to recognize how difficult it is to accomplish a really memorable summation, they'll think, oh, it was a good summation, 9 out of 10. You didn't realize how hard it was to do that. That should be a 10 out of 10 because, one, nobody else attempted it, and two, nobody else did it. Even if they'd attempted it, this one person managed to do it in such a way that, for me, I see it blows me away. It's like seeing a 50-yard pass in football. You're like, whoa, it doesn't happen every day. But if you're just, trying to figure out who to rank first, second, third, you miss the significance of that moment and the skill that it took. And so, you asked me if I like judging. I actually haven't judged that much in Toastmasters, and it's because I compete a lot. You can't judge if you compete, but that competition gives me the level of experience to be able to recognize talent and unusual talent, which we have a lot of in this activity.
Wow, thank you. Thank you for that detailed explanation. Now we want to zoom in on District TableTopics 2025. The question was, what is harder, training the body or training the mind? And your first answer was really good to the extent that it got a reaction. You said it depends on which side of 40 you are. And the audience were like, oh, that's the audience really liked that.
It worked.
It worked, right? How did you quickly come about with that? Did you knew it was gonna work, or is it just like you giving a speech?
I have never given a speech on that topic. So I didn't know the topic ahead of time. But as soon as I heard the topic, it came to me, that line. We're the same age. So we're both at a middle point in our lives. We had birthdays a couple months apart. So for me, that 40 line is an important line, right? It's right in that part of my life that I'm in now. It's called midlife for a reason. A lot of things change past 40. So how did I come up with a line? That was God, Tolu. God came up with that line, and I was fortunate to be his vessel. And my job was to time it perfectly. I don't take credit for the line, but I take credit for the timing. So had I come out with that line too quickly, it would have been drowned out by my introduction and the applause that I got coming on the stage. Had I waited too long, the audience would have thought, oh, he doesn't know what to say. He's using this time to think of something. So I needed to time it perfectly. It worked really nicely, and humor doesn't come easy to me. So I was very proud of that speech.
Wow, yeah, I really like it. Really like it. Very, very creative and things like that. Now, let's talk about evaluation. You won evaluation in 2017 and 2023. Is there anything that you can remember between the difference between your experience in 2017 and 2023? Were they very similar, or was there something different that very significant?
There was something very different. In 2017, all Toastmasters speech contests were in person. In 2023, none of my levels of competing were in person, and I don't think anything had been in person for several years. We were in the same club. You know how long Gelfand was online for, right? A good 2 years. And even after we came back, the area, division, and district contests, a lot of them were still online. So in 2023, I did something I hate. I did speech contests online. And the reason I hate it is because there's so much that's out of your control, right? what happens when it rains in Florida? Sometimes you lose power for a bit. Well, you lose power, you lose internet. And you lose internet in an online speech contest. There's really nothing you can do except wait and hope that it comes back on very quickly. So that's something in the back of my mind. Something else is that some of these people I'm competing with have, a stage manager working on their lighting and their makeup, and they have a home that's conducive to speaking as if one were in a studio going to national news. And I have no lighting except my ordinary lamp, no professional lighting. I have no makeup. All this beauty is natural. And I prefer not to be in that mode, speaking to a light on a camera rather than speaking to eyes in person. So I had competed online because that was the option I had. But the challenge for me in 2023 was getting past so many other people who were better prepared for an online speech format because they had ring lights and they had makeup and they had a stage that was conducive to what they were trying to do. Things I never worried about in 2017.
Wow, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So similar question is the TableTopics experience in 2018 versus 2025. What were the difference between what you felt?
I'm glad you asked. I felt better about the 2025 speech that I did not win. I placed second. Than I did about the 2018 speech that I did win. Both were the same level. District 47, TableTopics contest, big stage, big audience, the highest you can go in that level of contest. But the difference is that I was a better speaker in 2025. And so I was able to do more. Even though I didn't win, I did show more skill in that speech. In 2018, that was raw energy, raw talent, and a terrible topic. The 2018 topic was bad, and it was bad for everybody. We all got the same topic. So I just happened to adapt a little bit better than 6 other people in the district finals. In 2025, I had Godfrey McAllister competing against me. He's been in the top 10 in the world championship of public speaking. He's won 5 district championships in a variety of events. He's very good at TableTopics. So I had better opposition. And I think the right person won, but that doesn't mean I wasn't proud of my speech or that I showed skill and was able to improve. I did improve. I am not competing in TableTopics in 2026 because I don't feel I could improve from what I did in 2025. I think that was a good representation of what I can do there. So if I'm going to compete, I'll pick a different contest.
Oh wow! Thank you so much. Yeah, I agree with you. He was sitting beside me, and we had some chat about his delivery. We're both really good. They're both really good. Thank you so much for sharing that. One of the things that I really want to know is when you have given speeches. I've seen a couple of your speeches. When you think about these speeches, is there any one of them that you felt, oh, maybe I could have given a little bit more information, or even take out some information in any of these speeches that you really think about? Because when you give speeches, you think about your speeches, right? Anyone?
I do. So the speech that comes to mind was the third prepared speech that I ever gave in Toastmasters. And it was a speech about a tragic case of a young girl who was in the foster care system and was neglected and abused by everybody around her. Her birth family, her foster family, the other people who lived in the home. And it was a story that I read in the newspaper, the Sun Sentinel, and it resonated with me and it impacted me, and I felt the need to share. But after the speech, which I thought went very well, someone asked me if I was related to the girl who I spoke about. And I'm not. I've never met her. I had no connection with her. But I realized that I'd forgotten to explain to the audience why I decided to talk on this particular subject. So I gave a lot of information, but I missed an important point. Why? Why did I give that speech at that moment? And I had a reason, but I didn't tell the audience. And so if I could go, I never gave that speech again. But if I ever do, I'll make sure that I let the audience know why I felt this was an important thing to share.
Good, good, good. Thank you so much. I also discovered that's something that you do once in a while to give a report on something that happened. I've seen you've done that in PowerPoints before and things like that. That's also to educate people. And that's nothing personal that you experience, but something that another person experienced that you think people can learn from. That's very nice to hear something like that once in a while too. So another part of your speaking that I also want to understand is when you give speeches, it seems very natural. It seems that you remember everything that you practiced, but we both know that that's not always going to be the case. In the case you forget a line or you just blank out all of a sudden because somebody in the audience that seems to not like you is staring at you, and you blank out for a second, what do you do?
This happens to everybody, even in the world championship stage with speeches that they've been practicing for almost a year. I see a speaker get stuck. And usually they only get stuck for maybe half a second or a quarter of a second, but it's long enough for me to notice and probably other people to notice as well. I think the trick is not to pretend that you didn't forget, but rather to just let the moment hang for a bit and then collect yourself as quickly as you can and make the point that you were getting at before. The skill at which a speaker recovers, it depends. It depends on their experience, on their nervousness. It depends on who the audience is, what the stakes are. I've judged a lot of high school kids. That's mostly who I've judged. And I've seen high school kids who were super talented. They could compete on a world championship stage and not be embarrassed at all. But I've seen them get stuck and you feel so bad because they can't recover quickly. They're truly trying to remember where they were. And that's painful, right? You're there, the audience feels for them. For me, I usually recover quickly. And I think that's part of that is practice. I speak a lot. My job is teaching kids. And so, I'm speaking 6 hours a day sometimes. And it kept my brain, I think, fresher than my chronological age. But when you get older, you get stuck more, right? I don't know about your parents, but my dad is not as quick as he was 30 years ago, 35 years ago, right? You slow down your body, your brain. And so if I had to give any tips, I would say keep your body healthy, keep your mind engaged. It doesn't matter if you're retired, right? You could not work, but find other ways to stay engaged and active. And I think the nature of my job is that I use a lot of speech and I use a lot of mental power. I don't have a physical job. I have a mental job. And that's helped me to recover more smoothly than maybe I might have.
Good, good. Thank you so much. It's very important you say that aging is something that we cannot control, right? You just have to age naturally or age gracefully, just like the people say. And this actually happened during the semifinals. I'm not sure you're aware of this. This just concluded convention, and it's because of aging, based on what I observed. I might be wrong. And the audience was really, really supportive because they understood, and that's what I really liked about that. And we cannot get away from aging. We're all gonna age. Some people try to age backwards, but it's still aging anyways.
Yeah, there's also advantages, right, to aging. You age, you gain more experience.
Yep.
Right. I might be a step slower than I was at 20, but I know a lot more things and I've met a lot more people and I've had more experience. So you use the advantages you have. Youth have energy. Youth have time. Older people have wisdom and experience. So you use what you have.
Yeah. It seems like as the energy goes down, the experience comes up. It's more like this.
Yes.
It's pendulum, something like that. Thank you for sharing that. Really like that. This question I want to ask on 3 speeches that I've seen, that I've heard. three options. Which one of these three speeches do you like the most? You don't have to tell us the content of the speech. The grumpy old man, who you are, the dance.
I love the grumpy old man speech. I think it's so fun. And the reason it's fun is because we all know a person like that who tends to look at the past as if it were perfect and is just suspicious of everything going on that's new or even present. So that's an example of a universal topic. I could have given that speech in South Korea, probably in Africa, Europe, North America, South America. And I think it works equally well, right? That's not a cultural context. That's the nature of humans, that we tend to think the best time in our lives were in our golden age. And our golden age might not be the same. It might be in your high school years, your college years, your 20s, when you first met your wife, but you have that time, and nothing compares to the golden years or your golden age. I love the speech. It's really funny. I'm relaxed when I give the speech, and it's different from some of the other speeches I've given. That's my favorite.
Yeah, it was very funny. I still listened to it a couple of days ago. There's something I really want to hear your thoughts about. The international speech. It seems that I stand to be corrected that the contestant can use the same speech that they used during the club all the way to semifinals. And immediately they win the semifinals, they have to come up with a new speech within was it 48 hours thereabout?
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on that?
That is a great question. And most people will say that you give your best speech all through the semifinals, and then you switch in the finals and give a second speech. I think it depends on the speaker. For example, you don't have to change your speech in the finals. You just can't give the same speech in the semifinals as you do in the finals. So you could save your best speech for the finals and give a new speech in the semifinals. Now, the thing is, your semifinal speech doesn't have to win. It just has to be second or higher. But if you get to that final stage and you have your best speech and everybody else has their second best speech, I think you have a tremendous advantage, right? You're risking not getting to the finals, but if you're in the finals, you have an advantage. And for me, 2018, the year that Ramona won, I know that Anita Fain Taylor had a brilliant speech she wasn't able to give in the finals because she used it in semis. Had she been able to use it in finals, I think she would have done better than third in the world. Third in the world is great, but I know that the other speech she had was even better than the speech she gave. So Anita made a calculation, and one that most people would say she made the smart choice. You can't win the contest if you don't get to the finals. But for my money, I'm going to put Anita's talent above most people in the semifinals and believe that she would have at least come in second in that semifinal round with her final speech. My opinion, you'll have to ask Anita Fain Taylor if I'm right or not.
Wow. Yeah, that was history was made that the top three were women,
and they were great. All three were great.
Mm-hmm.
They were great.
Yeah, I remember that we were in Girlfriend. We watched this speech together in the same room. Yeah, those are good times.
And when I booked that flight to Chicago, Anita hadn't made it yet. I had no idea I was going to see somebody from my club on the final stage. No idea.
Wow. Interesting. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, that's good. Thank you for sharing that. So, quick question. Any of these speeches or other speeches, if you could go back to use prop in any of these speeches, which one of them would you say, well, if I'd used prop, it could be more effective, or you just don't like prop at all?
I don't like props for me when I'm speaking. I enjoy props when other people are using them because I'm not going to make a mistake, right? I'm in the audience. If they make a mistake, they make a mistake. I've used props. I told you the story about the orange and throwing it, and it landed in the trash bin at that area contest. For me, the best prop I've ever seen used is from a speech from 2015 called The Power of Words. I believe his name is Muhammad Khatani. I might have gotten the name wrong, but the speech is called The Power of Words. He takes a cigarette in the very beginning of the speech and pretends to light it. I've never seen anything like that. I mean,
Yeah.
he did it perfectly. It was funny. It got the audience's attention. He was able to segue into a point that made a lot of sense. And that speaker didn't have the biggest voice. He used his prop and it enhanced his speech. And even though he didn't have the biggest voice, he had the best speech by far in that year, 2015. He beat all the people with big booming voices who can project and had more tonal variety. And he did it so calmly and so effectively. I don't think anybody could have done better. You know, if you'd given me a cigarette, I would have fumbled the cigarette, you know, accidentally burned my finger. And he did it perfectly.
Wow, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that. So now we're wrapping up, just a couple of questions. So you went to the convention in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
You've mentioned a couple of things that you really enjoy about the convention. Is there anything that you also enjoyed about the convention that you've not mentioned, the one that you attended in 2018?
I was only at the convention for one day. I had a ticket to the World Championship of Public Speaking, the finals, and I watched that. So I was in Chicago maybe 30 hours. I didn't have a lot of time to do other things or sit in meetings and network as much as I could have if I were staying for the whole week. But the atmosphere of seeing people from all over the world come together and celebrate some of the best speakers in the world, I thought was moving. I felt that it was worth the money I spent hopping on the plane, staying at a hotel, and the ticket price just to see that World Championship final, even without having one of my club members on the final. It was special for me, and I had aspirations of being on big stages just like that. I think that if you have the chance to do it and you care about public speaking, that's our Super Bowl. Why
Yeah,
not? Even if you
that's
only do
good.
it, why not?
That's good. I think you should do it. You have all the skills, you have all the qualities. Why not? Because I've been there twice now on the stage. So yeah, we people who get to those stage, they only have one head, right? They don't have two. Right. So yeah, that's a good thing to aspire. So I really want to understand. You started public speaking much before you joined Toastmasters. So joining Toastmasters, which idea about public speaking changed after you joined Toastmasters?
I was a high school debater. That's how I learned public speaking. And debate is not necessarily about how you can connect with the audience effectively. There's an element of that, but that's not really what it's about. Debate is about showing an advantage over your opponent when you're discussing a particular topic, political, economic, social. And so you want to win in debate in a different way than you want to win in speech. In speech, you want to win by effectively connecting with the audience. In debate, you want to win by defeating your opponent and showing the judge that you've defeated your opponent. Those are very different things. And I didn't have a dynamic style when I was in high school. I had a particular style and I could do it fairly well. And it took me to a lot of different places. I competed at Harvard. I went to the state championship in college. I went to a national championship. Toastmasters showed me there's a purpose beyond simply getting a trophy or winning. And the purpose is being able to communicate not with that one audience, but really with any audience. It could be a board of directors at a company, it could be a city council or a school board, and it could be your club in Toastmasters. And you don't have to show dominance. You don't have to show people you're smarter than everybody else. In fact, that's a disadvantage. Nobody likes the speaker who's showing too much that they're smarter than everybody else, right? That
Yeah.
makes you feel like you might be inferior or they think that they are superior. So
Yeah.
Toastmasters taught me to be more of a human and more relaxed on the stage, and to play with humor and to take more risks, things that I never had to do when I was in high school and in college and competing. So it was a transition for sure. And I had to broaden my skill set. But all my success that I've had professionally, I attribute that to the time that I spent honing those techniques. And a lot of that was Toastmasters. You know, Toastmasters gave me a stage, they gave me speaking time, they put me on the agenda, they let me compete. You know, how many people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s get the chance to pursue a hobby at that level? Usually, you play baseball as a kid, you stop as an adult. You play football as a kid, you stop as an adult. I never really stopped. I started at 13 and I just continued to grow for 27 years. And I never thought I would keep doing this, but I enjoy it and I plan to continue.
Wow, wow, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So you mentioned debates now. It's one of the things that you did before being a Toastmasters. But I would also like to know, are there other activities that you're doing outside Toastmasters that supported your public speaking skills?
Several. I am a person who likes to see talent. It doesn't necessarily need to be speech talent. So one of the things that I have fun with is stand-up comedy. I've done a little bit of stand-up comedy on the very local level, open mics, that sort of thing. But I enjoy just being in the audience and watching somebody who has such command that they can make you laugh every 10 to 15 seconds, you know, without fail. Boom, 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 boom. And they can make so many people laugh that they can make a living. Think about it. They're basically
Yeah.
a clown, right? They're not solving homelessness. They're not passing laws. They're not teaching a generation of students like the two of us have taught. They are making people laugh and getting paid a lot of money if they can do it well. And what is the effect of that? You make people happy. You know, they gave you their money, they gave you their time. What did you give them? Happiness, entertainment. Maybe you made them think too. There's comedians that are political and push a social agenda or a political agenda, but having the skill to do it at such a high level, I love it. And that's helped my public speaking. It's taught me new ways to connect with the audience.
Wow, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So we're wrapping up. I really enjoyed the conversation, but this is a very interesting question. I really want to know the answers to. So you were in Korea, China, and US.
Mhm.
And I know you mentioned something a little bit earlier today, but then I still want to see if there are other aspects of these. How is public speaking different when you move from Korea to China to US?
All right. Public speaking is different in a hierarchical society. In a hierarchical society like South Korea, if your boss is giving a speech to a neighborhood committee or a citywide event, you are going to go to see that speech because your boss is doing it. It might not have anything to do with your job. Nothing. It might be on a day that you're not even supposed to be working, but it is expected that the employees are going to support the boss. And in fact, sometimes it's required, not even expected. You must go whether you want to or not. And when you have that level of hierarchy, you're always going to get a greater level of respect from the audience, right? Because they're there because you're above them in some sense. And in the United States, that's not so common. My boss has never told me you got to be at this event that has nothing to do with your job because I'm giving a speech and I want to bring a big audience. That's just not part of American culture, and that would be considered violating their freedom, their autonomy, their time off, work-life balance. So I think one of the things that I did well when I was in Korea and also China was never forcing the audience to be there, but getting them excited to be there through whatever I had to say. And that's how I got promoted the first time in South Korea. I was a teacher and I became an administrator of a school and then eventually a small district of schools. And it was because during the trainings and workshops for employees, people always came up to me and said, Luis, that was really moving. I loved that speech. And they were there because it was their job, but they enjoyed it. And even if it hadn't been their job, they still would have enjoyed it. Whereas I think if you're just accustomed to, well, they're going to come because I'm the general manager, you don't have to work so hard at entertaining the audience and moving the audience. And so that's a major difference, right? When you are in a culture that's not accustomed to using humor and humanizing a speaker, it gives you a new angle at which to connect. And then I brought that back to the United States.
Wow, thank you. That's very insightful. Really enjoy that. So I know you said you started debating at the age of 13.
Yes.
Is there anything that made you develop the interest in public speaking at that young age?
Absolutely. So I peaked at sports around 10. So I needed something else to do that I was better at than baseball and soccer and martial arts. I was like any other kid. I did sports when I was young. I played on the street. I played for little leagues and recreationally from the time I was 5 through probably about 12. But the thing is, the higher the level, the worse I got in comparison to the rest of my team or my peers. So that happens, right? At some point, you reach a peak where you can no longer go on with your sport or your activity. So speech and debate was a new activity for me that I'd never done. And I had the opportunity starting in 9th grade, and I found that I was good at it. And so because I wasn't on the baseball team and the soccer team, I had the chance to do this and loved it.
Wow, interesting. Yeah, speaking about soccer, I saw the picture you shared on Facebook and saw you playing soccer. And previously, I knew that you liked boxing.
I
So,
do.
which love comes from? Love for soccer, or love for boxing?
Which daughter do you love more, Tolu? It's a hard question to ask. Initially, my first love was football. My parents are Brazilian,
Mhm.
and that's a national. Forget about sport; it's a national religion in Brazil.
Yep.
Football, right? The country stops when the national team is playing. You're not going to be working. You're not going to be doing your taxes. You're not going to be spanking your child. You are watching the game for those 2 hours uninterrupted, probably with a big group of people. So I had the opportunity in 1994 to go to Brazil and watch the World Cup. It was actually in the United States that year, but Brazil ended up winning the World Cup. It was the first time that they'd won in 20 years. So it was a big, big deal. And getting caught up in that excitement of not a household celebrating, but an entire country celebrating every single game. It's hard not to love a sport when you get that feeling and that energy. And guess what? In 2026, this summer, it's in the United States again. The World
Wow.
50 Cup will be hosted by the United States and Canada and Mexico, but most games will be in the United States. And what a chance for me to circle back to the point where I first really fell in love with the game. Now, boxing is something that happened later in my life where I started following Mike Tyson fights. He was a big boxer in the 80s and into the 90s. And then from there, I learned about other boxers, historical boxers. And what I love about boxing is it's 1v1. Two people are in the ring. Nobody can leave the ring. And who has the most will, right? Because nobody
Mhm.
likes to get punched in the face. You ever met
Mhm.
anybody who likes to get punched in the face? I've
No.
never. But you're going to go in the ring, you're going to get punched in the face, but can you withstand that fire? And it says something to me about somebody's character, that they're willing to go into that place, that dark place. Tolu, I wouldn't go in the ring. I wouldn't fight. I don't want him to punch me in the face. But they have such courage, physical and mental courage. And I think there's a beauty to that. And at the end of the fight, what do? They hug each other. They've beat
Mhm.
each other up for 10 rounds and then they hug each other. There's something special about that. So I don't know. I love both.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So, literally, my last question before wrap up. So I know you coach students and adults in public speaking. What is your most fulfilling experience doing that for students and for adults?
I've definitely coached more students. I have coached adults, and some of the adults have gone on to do great things in public speaking, TED Talks, competitions, getting promoted at their job. But I'm a teacher, so I interact with students on a daily basis, and coaching a high school team for the last 11 years has been an exciting journey. People don't know about how competitive high school speech and debate is. I've gone to Wisconsin, Massachusetts, Iowa, Kentucky, Georgia, all over the place with these teams. And then there are hundreds of other teams from all over the world that are doing the same thing. Everybody's worked hard. So I've had the chance to coach some nationally ranked speech and debate students who are way more talented than me, way more. I mean, because they could do things at 16 and 17 that I struggle with now at 40. And they're so young and at such a high level. That's not everybody, of course, but there's a few that I've coached like that. And to be part of that, short of having your own child, is the
Mhm.
most special thing I've ever been a part of. To be part of somebody's life on the greatest day of their life when they're on a stage and getting recognized by their peers for being a champion. It is it's moving, and it's even if I didn't get paid a dime, it would be moving just the same. I have memories and photos and relationships with kids, and I don't know what they're going to do with these public speaking skills, but I was a part in having them develop those skills and gain confidence, and that makes me feel so important and also special that I had this moment with, a team or a student, and we shared it, and it's a bond. I have kids that I taught 11 years ago and I don't see every day because they moved out of state. We always have a bond, right? We did this thing together. We traveled all over the country, and I learn as much from them as they learn from me. No question. I've gotten better because of them.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for joining us in this episode of Solution Illuminators series podcast. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel so we can reach more people. Now we want to ask our guest, Toastmaster Luiz Bravim. Are there any last thoughts you want to share for our guests as we wrap up the session?
My final thought is that don't be afraid to take risks. If you take a risk and fail, nobody will remember tomorrow. Nobody. Not even if you're being recorded, not even if you're on YouTube. There's too many other things in the world going on. But if you take a risk and succeed, what you've done is you've proven to yourself that you can do something difficult. Getting on stage is not easy. I it's not in my nature to be the center of attention. I'm not an extrovert. I don't like a lot of attention, but I appreciate the skill and I appreciate the effort that goes into developing that skill. And you can't get better if you don't take risks. That's it.
Good. Thank you so much, Toastmaster Luiz Bravim. Really appreciate your time, your skills, your knowledge that you shared today. Till next time on Solution Elementary Series podcast.